when you're in class to maximize your focus and concentration and engagement and even your level of enjoyment. What we want out of class is to feel like we got a lot of really good learning done. We don't want to feel like we're just more confused about what's going on. We want to have a pretty good understanding of this topic. Now, remember, these are just fundamental techniques, and so we will be, especially these sets of techniques, we'll be significantly upgrading and replacing them in the system later to come. But if these are new to you, then please get used to them, apply them, practice them. They will give you an immediate benefit, but the idea with these fundamentals is it just gets you used to experimenting a little bit. It gives you some immediate, tangible tips that you can use for your studying straight away. There's almost no real learning curve to any of these techniques, and they will give you an immediate form of benefit. Now, it may not be the level of benefit that we want to achieve by the end of this, but it will be a benefit nonetheless, and you're not gonna have to wait, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks until you learn the upgraded version of the technique, and in the meantime, you're falling asleep in class. Obviously, we don't want that. So, few things that we can talk about when it comes to in-class technique. Now, one of the things that people generally underestimate is the power of pre-study and learning a little bit of the material beforehand. And I'm not talking about getting a full understanding of the entire topic before you sit in class so that you're not even needing to listen to what the teacher says or the lecturer says if you're at university. What I'm talking about is simply getting a familiarization with a few basic elements of the topic so we know how to think about this. And so the in-class performance is actually really significantly impacted by how familiar you are with the content. So for example, if I put you in a 4th year university lecture, you are probably not going to be able to follow along very well unless you're in 4th year or above university. However, if I put you in a year 8 class, even if you technically forgot what you learned in year 8, it's going to be very easy for you to pick up on it because you have so much other knowledge that's related to it. So when you learn something new, it's like, oh, that's kind of obvious because you can relate it to so many other things. This is an idea that we're actually going to talk about and elaborate on a lot more coming up. But one of the first things that you can do is train yourself to do a topic level pre-study where you take the entire topic of what you might be learning for the next, maybe few weeks even, and you just try to isolate what are the 3 or 4 main ideas. And they may be the same as what your teacher tells you, they may be the same as what's in a study guide or whatever other resource you have available. It doesn't really matter. Or you may find that actually there's another way of grouping it together. There may be 7 main concepts that you find in your resources. But when you really think about it, you might think, you know what? This one and this one are kind of the same sort of thing. It's sort of talking about the same thing. And you can start grouping it together. So I challenge you to find just 3 or 4 main ideas. And working with students from the range of curriculums within not only Australia and New Zealand, but also within university levels and IB, which is obviously international, multiple other countries, I've never really found a situation where the topic couldn't be broken up into roughly 3 or 4 main concepts or groups of concepts and basic ideas. So that's what you need to do in the pre-study. You're not aiming to read and learn absolutely everything about everything. You don't need to memorize anything really. All you're doing is you're just kind of going through the material enough and just thinking like, okay, what is the main idea here? So for, let's say, 3 weeks of class material, which is, an entire topic, let's say, that whole topic might take you, a dozen hours to study. Normally, doing it this way, you might only spend 30 minutes to 1 hour. So you'd spend 30 minutes to 1 hour just reading through all the different, class material or the lecture material or whatever it is in there in the topic. And then by the end of that, you're able to say, okay, so this is a topic that really talks about these 3 or 4 main ideas. And then on top of that, you want to think about how do those ideas kind of relate to each other? What's the relationship between there? You're forming a basic backbone. You want to say, all right, this is a topic which talks about this idea of A and how without it, you really can't get B. But then because of it, you get C occurring and then D happens. So a few ideas and the relationship or flow of ideas between those basic groups of concepts or concepts. And the reason this is so beneficial is because it primes your brain. And priming is a proper terminology to use here. in that it gives your brain a way of thinking about this to help it make sense of what you learn in class. So when you learn something in class, now there's an anchor point that it can attach to. You can think, oh, this is new information, but I can see how it is kind of related to this. It gives the information a place to belong, and when we learn more about the learning psychology, we see how that can drastically change that slope of the forgetting curve that we talked about before, and it can increase your retention by a lot. So it's an incredibly powerful technique that you can use. It's very easy to do. You don't have to stress too much about it. Like I said, just 30 minutes to an hour going through an entire topic's worth of content, just figuring out the main ideas and groups of ideas and how they're related to each other, and then take that knowledge with you into your class, and you will find that the class starts to make a little bit more sense. And hopefully you start having a few more questions about what the teacher is saying, which is a sign that you are activating more innate curiosity-driven learning processes, which are actually, from a neuropsychology point of view, more effective and increase your retention compared to other things that are not curiosity-driven, like rote learning. So that was the first thing, which is just doing a little bit of basic pre-reading or priming for the 3 to 4 main ideas and the relationships between them. The second thing that we can do, now this is truly when you're sitting there in class, is always make sure to paraphrase what's being said. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer here, this particular technique about paraphrasing, we're actually very quickly going to start upgrading that because there's a lot of stages that we can upgrade this towards, and it gets more and more efficient as time goes on. But in the early stages, if you're not already, and I know a lot of you will be, but if you're not already, make sure that you're not just copying verbatim. So there is research that says that people that copy verbatim, and verbatim means word for word, they have a lower level of retention, and their test results and exam results are actually worse. And this is another reason why typing your notes is actually not very effective, because typing makes it so easy to get information down because it's so much faster than writing that it stops you from needing to filter out what you're going to write down and what you're not. And as a result, your notes end up being more word for word. And so the closer it is to being word for word, the lower the level of retention. And this is actually what's called passive learning. And you may have heard of the difference between passive versus active learning. Passive learning means that your brain is not really switched on. And so even though you are taking notes, there's not really any learning going on in here. It's just like a mindless activity, like kind of if you're like washing dishes and you're not really paying attention, you're just kind of doing the action. That's sort of what's going on, is that you're sitting there, you're listening and you're writing stuff down, but there's no real learning going on in your head. And yes, you can go and take that information and learn it properly afterwards. If you don't have much content to study, or if you have a lot of time available for you during the week, then that's fine. But what you'll find, and what the university students out there will know, is that that's not really possible at a university level, especially for more difficult content, or even if you're doing a difficult type of curriculum in high school or a difficult subject, information is usually thrown at you quite quickly. You've got a lot of stuff to study, and if you need to then spend time afterwards to study it again to actually understand and gain proper learning from that, that is a lot of time wasted, which you're not going to be able to afford. And even if you can afford it, I would personally rather spend that time, socializing or playing games or picking up new hobbies or just sleeping more, or like saying hi to my mum or something like that. There's better ways to use that time. And so you don't want your words to be verbatim. You want to make sure you're always paraphrasing, and if possible, paraphrase to the simplest and most concise form as is possible for you. And you should feel mentally there's a bit of a challenge here. And that's a good sign. You should feel that, man, this is requiring quite a lot of concentration for me to take this information in and really condense it down and really quickly make notes of it. If you feel that, that's actually a good sign, because it means that the time spent in class is contributing towards increasing your attention. And it's also a foundation skill that you need to develop. Otherwise, you're really going to struggle with a lot of the more efficient techniques out there when it comes to note taking, because word for word note taking caps off in efficiency very, very early. Okay, so we've covered number one, the idea of pre-study in that very specific way, topic-wide, not lesson-wide. And then number two, the idea of being much more active and engaged with your learning through extreme paraphrasing as much as possible, and not typing your notes. And again, there's going to be study gurus that are out there that say that's not the case, but you know what? They probably can't justify their recommendation. They probably will just say, oh, it's much faster for me to type than it is to write. Well, I'm telling you, it's much faster for you to learn by not typing than it is to type and get notes down without having actually learned anything. And not only is there research on this, but you ask any of the students in our community, they will know what we're talking about because they will have felt the difference that it makes when you have an effective freehand note-taking strategy. And on that note, we move on to point number 3 is try to represent some ideas or relationships between ideas with arrows and spatial arrangement. So the thing is that you can actually represent a lot of information without having to write it. So I want you to imagine something like this. A leads to B, and then B leads to C and D. So we have A and B leading to C and D. If we were to represent that in a mind map or a flow chart or using arrows and spatial arrangement, we would say, okay, A is a pretty big topic. I'm going to put it right here. B is a pretty big topic. I'm going to put it right here. C is a little mini piece. I can put it right in the middle and I can put D directly underneath it. And when you look at the page, you're going to see A, B, little c, and then D. And you'll see the flow of information going down the page. That actually gives you a lot of information, and it uses a different part of your brain which is involved in spatial arrangement of things. This is why sometimes you can remember where on your notes information is, but you don't actually remember what it is in itself. Or you remember generally the position of items in your room or something, but you don't actually remember exactly where it is. Your brain's ability to process information in space on the page, the position of things on the page, actually provides it with a lot more cues that allow it to record that information much more easily and increases your retention. Now, when we add arrows into the mix, it makes it even easier. Because let's say the relationship between A to B and then C to D, in words, we would have to say A is a process that allows B to occur, which leads to C, and once C is occurred, D is able to occur. That's quite a long list of things, and when you write it, the only way that you can really process that information is to read it from start to finish. You can't really look at an entire paragraph and just instantaneously take that information in. Visual processing is tens of thousands of times faster than your ability to process written words. So if you have A arrow B arrow C plus D, that communicates the relationship almost exactly the same way, and you're not really losing any detail there, nothing that was actually really meaningful at all, but your ability to take that in and also to revise it is much faster, because when you look at your notes, you will be able to process, take that information in, and work with it literally tens of thousands of times faster than if you were to read things. This is actually something that we already know. For example, if you've ever read Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien spends like an entire page describing a single door. When you watch Lord of the Rings, the movie, you just see the door and you think that's quite a fancy door. And you know about the door and the characteristics of the door and the lighting and all of that sort of stuff. The picture speaks 1,000 words. Actually, the picture speaks like 10,000 words. And if you're writing 10,000 words with something that can be represented with arrows and spatial arrangement to form kind of a picture type understanding, you are going to be able to study that much faster. And again, this is something that students often find very difficult when they enter into university, because you're so used to writing everything out. So it's a good thing to start breaking away from this early on. It's very easy to do. Take it to a level that you're comfortable with. I'm not saying replace everything that you're writing with these crazy diagrams or anything like that. All I'm saying is that when you see there's a certain relationship, instead of writing it as a paragraph or a list, think, can I express this through some arrows or a mini mind map? Is there another way that I can represent this information that will make it a bit visually clearer for me to see and make kind of a bit of a story or a flow or an image out of it? And always think about that and start getting used to that. And the earlier you practice this, the easier it will be to transition into some of the high power, high efficiency techniques that we're going to teach later on. So far we've got pre-study, we've got the idea of active learning through paraphrasing, and also now not only just paraphrasing, but introducing the idea of this visual element, arrows, and spatial arrangement as well. Now again, you don't have to be perfect at this. What I want you to do is give it a go. I want you to experiment with it. I want you to try, feel it out. Don't worry if you feel like it's not giving you the perfect result. The most important thing is that you give it a go, you see how you find it, and if there's something that you think you can do to improve, give that a go as well. It's a very low risk thing that we're trying to do here. You're not going to fail a paper by doing this. You're not even going to impact your exam result negatively by doing this. We're simply getting you to just taste a little bit of these different things, and if it works for you, great, keep going, and if it doesn't, think about why. Experiment a little bit, and then after that you can ask us why. You can say, we've tried this and it doesn't work, what would you suggest? And then eventually, as you move through the course, you will actually again upgrade all of these skills. Everything that I talk about in these foundations, we will upgrade all of that eventually anyway. So for now, just get your feet wet, just get a little bit into it, just start experimenting a little bit and start building a bit of that basic competence. And the final thing that I want to add on here is the idea of listening first. So this kind of is a bit implicit. So if you were paying attention to the previous stuff, it's kind of impossible to paraphrase information without having listened to it first. And I know it's tempting, especially in a fast-paced lecture or a class, to be constantly writing things down or to be typing things as the person is speaking to you. But this is actually really disadvantageous for your learning, because not only is it not activating your brain, so it means that you're spending time sitting there listening to this person and you're not even learning from it. All you're doing is just you're like a human photocopier, like a transcribing machine, and you're not getting the learning that you could be getting out of it. So it's time wasted, but it also is not training your brain to be able to learn through that auditory type of learning. And remember what we talked about before, training yourself to learn through different modes is extremely beneficial. So if you know that you struggle to listen and really learn through listening, training yourself to do that is going to be enormous benefit to you for later in life. I mean, imagine if you could learn extremely effectively, whether that's it's spoken, whether it's experienced, whether it's read, whether it's seen or visualized. All of these methods, they are under your domain. Your ability to work with and manipulate information and turn it into something that you can really use and get those top marks in tests and exams is so much higher than someone who's very fixed and only is able to work in a certain way. And again, the research is very clear. Unless there's some kind of medical abnormality with your brain, and this is not a meme, so it's probably not going to be you, but actually even with learning disabilities like ADHD or dyslexia, it's actually still the case that you can learn through all these different modes, and you are able to train yourself to learn through these different modes. So it's definitely a worthwhile investment. So 4 things that we covered: the pre-study, the paraphrasing, the arrows and the spatial arrangement, and the listening first before you write. And again, most importantly, don't worry about getting it perfect. The idea is to just give it a go, get a taste for it, experiment with a little bit. Once you're comfortable, start experimenting a little bit more, getting a bit more comfortable, so that later on when we teach you other techniques that are more advanced, then it will be a lot easier to use those techniques and incorporate them and upgrade your system even more efficiently.